Well, hey, my name is Daniel Ludwig. Brad asked me if I could come up and share a little bit of experience about my time spent in Israel. So in college, I had the privilege of spending 3.5 months in Israel for studying abroad. And so I got to spend some good time there. And I've never been on a trip with Brad. One day I will, hopefully. I'll be able to take my wife. She's never been to Israel. But while I was there, some of the experiences I had, I just wanted to share with you. First of all, I wanted to kind of reiterate what a lot of people have come up here and said, that like being in Israel really does change the way you view the Bible. I always tell people being in Israel basically turns black and white Bible into color Bible. And so, you're able to experience, and as you're reading through, like, oh, I know what that area looks like, or oh, I know what kind of thorns they would have used for Christ's, crown, or, then that sort of detail that you just don't get unless you've been there. So that's a really big reason in and of itself to go. But some of the other things I kind of wanted to focus on are, first of all, the history there is so deep, right? Like in America, you go to a house that's like 100 years old, 150 years old, you're like, wow, this is an old place, right? In Israel, they're like 150 years old. That's like, I was just recently built, right? And so it's just like the depth of history there is thousands of years rather than hundreds of years or tens of years, right? And then there's also like a passion that people have for the land. Like for you and I, we buy land, and it's a place that we have a house on. And like 4 years later, we're gonna sell it, and we're gonna move to another place, right? And like we don't really care about the land. In Israel, it's not like that. Like most people, they have been there with their family for years and years and years, and that is like their place. And if somebody comes and does something to their land or anything like that, it's deeply hurting to them. And so there's a passion that they have for the actual place, right? And that's why you see so much tension, because it's not just a place where they have their house. It's deep rooted. One example of that was while I was there, I was with my friend Seth, and we were walking around. We were looking for the Tower of Ascension on the Mount of Olives. And as we were walking through, an older Arab gentleman approached us. And he's like, hey, how's it going? What are you guys doing in this area? And we're like, oh, well, we're just going to the Tower of Ascension. And he was like, oh, okay, well, it's closed today, but I'm actually like the patriarch of my family. We've lived up here for 1,200 years. And every day I look for someone to bring to our guest house, and we have lunch. And I'd like to invite you guys to do that. And we were like, okay, well, he might be leading us to our death, but let's go. And so we were in college, so we'll go for it. So we went to his house, and he did he had this huge pot of stuff. I don't even know what it was, but I mean it's good. And then we sat there and just talked to him, and he had the key to New York City on his wall. He had pictures shaking hands with a bunch of different presidents, because as a patriarch of the family, he wasn't a citizen of Israel, but his family lives there because they've lived there forever, and Israel allows him to live there. And so he, his name was Ibrahim, and I was just like, it was really interesting talking to him. I asked him, because he goes to the UN and talks about how to solve, the Middle East tensions all the time and stuff. And so I asked him, I was like, okay, well, so what's your solution? And he was like, well, if everybody stops giving Israel money, then it'll be solved. And I was like, okay, got it. Yeah. So I didn't really agree with the stuff that he said, but it's still it's interesting. And so there's a lot of depth of history and knowledge. And if you go out and you walk around and you talk to people, there's a lot to be learned just from being there and being around the people and see how everything works. And then even while I was there, I befriended shopkeepers that were there. There's a lot of people that have deep history and deep knowledge, and there's a lot of passion. So walk around, talk to people, experience other things, and obviously biblical sites and summers. It's amazing to see all of that. But there's such a clash of cultures. You've got Jews, you've got Christians, you've got Arabs and Muslims. It's just Armenians. They're all right there, and they're all doing their thing, and you can talk to all of them and see what they think and how they think about the world. And it's a really cool, deep experience. So anyway, that's kind of a quick little snippet. If you want to know more, you can
segue to what we're going to talk about tonight too. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. We've been talking about geography. We've been talking about geography, and especially the God-made areas of the world. Tonight we're going to talk about a couple of man-made places that preserve some geographical locations for us. And there's a lot to talk about with this, and honestly, these are two of my favorite things to talk about, so I'm going to try to limit it down to what we have in terms of time tonight, and see if I can talk about the most important things as we're going through it. But we're going to talk about two churches in particular tonight. The Church of the Annunciation, which is in Nazareth, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is in Jerusalem. And from this point forward, when I, instead of saying the Church of the Holy Sepulchre every time, I'm going to try to just say CHS, putting it down in terms of time. It's a little bit of a tongue twister to say that 1,000 times at one time, but I want to talk with you about an introductory idea as we're leading into that. Something I've been thinking about for quite a while. I think when I was younger in particular, I had this habit of saying, I don't like blank. Like, I don't like that music, or I don't like that art, or I don't like that architecture. And somewhere along the line, I had somebody say to me, you shouldn't say you don't like it. Maybe it would be better to say, I fail to appreciate it. Now there are some forms of music which maybe you could say, I don't like that music. And certainly that would be the same for art and other things too. I think there are some bad things out there, evil things even in terms of art. But for the most part, I would say that part of our difficulty with things that are different from our normal or outside of our range of comfortability is that we just don't know how to appreciate them. I was forced in college to take a class on art appreciation. And it wasn't one of my favorite things, at least going into it. But as we started to scratch the surface of things, and as I started to understand the history of art and artists and what they were trying to accomplish by what they were doing on a canvas, for instance, or in a sculpture, or in a piece of music, it really helped me to move forward in appreciating that. And I think about even, I like music, particularly 80s music, God-given 80s music. But I didn't, most of the music that I like, I didn't like the first time that I heard it. It took some getting used to, right? It takes some assimilation. It takes some learning to appreciate it. It's the same thing I would say with coffee. I don't like coffee. But I know that people really like coffee, and they had to acquire it. There's nobody, you guys, who liked coffee the first time they tried it. You have to acquire a taste for it, right? And gradually reduce the amount of sugar and creamer and all that. I'm not an aficionado with coffee, but I know this is the normal process. So you grow to appreciate those things after spending time trying to appreciate those things. And I would say that these two churches in particular, that's my original experience with them too, especially CHS. It was one that I could not stand when I walked into it the first probably 5 or 6 times that I went to it. But over time, I understood how you see beyond the noise of the place. And when I'm talking about noise, I mean literally noise. There are lots of different kinds of people doing lots of different kinds of things. And it's often loud, and it's often in competition with one another in that place. And so you literally have to force out and filter out that noise. But then there's also all kinds of visual noise, things that you're just not used to seeing. And it can be really overwhelming. Sometimes there's not enough light in there, you can't even see what you're trying to see. And oftentimes you're seeing things that are just outside of your experience. And that's the same thing with the sounds and the smells of that place. It can be very, very overwhelming. And especially when all that stuff is together, and especially when, like it always is, it's packed with people. One of the things Daniel talked about is that you can come in contact with a lot of different kinds. He talked about Christians and Jews and Muslims. But there are so many different brands of Christians within the Holy Land that we go to, and from all over the world. And you see people who are Christians who dress very differently than you do, who worship very differently than you do, who sound very different than you do, look very different than you do. And sometimes that can be as foreign and challenging to you as all of the rest of it. And imagine that you're dealing with all of that all at one time and in one place. It's one of the reasons, honestly, why I love to go to Israel, is because I think we need to stretch our boundaries a little bit. We need to get around people who are different from us. And Israel really is a safe place to do that. But it is a wide-ranging place, too. There are people who very passionately believe different things than you believe. And so it can be very stretching to come into contact with things like that. And so in my notes this morning, I had written that understanding churches in the Holy Land, but I think I wanted to actually title what we're doing tonight, Appreciating the Churches in the Holy Land. And there's a couple of things I wanted to point out to you. And I'm going to hold up a couple of books. You're going to think that I'm endorsing these books. I'm not. These are books that I bought because of their title. And they kind of promise more than they deliver. Maybe it's something you want to pick up and read, but I'm just saying that I didn't make it through them all the way because they didn't quite do what I had hoped they were going to do. But I think from the title, you'll understand what I was looking for when I bought these books. Just searching on Amazon for books like this. The first one was called How to Read a Church. And this is one that I was hoping, and it does to some degree. It's really about how to read and understand a Catholic church. Catholic churches, especially basilicas and cathedrals, are organized in particular ways. They have parts of them that each Catholic church is going to have, and each of those parts has a meaning and a purpose to it. And oftentimes when you walk into a building like that, you just have no idea what you're looking at. Why is it built like this? What is the structure for? What are they trying to accomplish by what they're doing with that building? So I picked this one up, and again, it was somewhat helpful, but didn't go quite as deep as I wanted to with that. The other one was this one called Theology in Stone. I think that's a really interesting title. I think people, when they try to express themselves in art, especially religiously express themselves in art, they have means and purposes in doing that. They're trying to declare something about what they think and feel about God. And I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but even our church buildings are built with a particular theology and methodology in mind. What would you guess if you... And this is hard because this is your context. This is what you're used to, right? You maybe don't know any other kind of architecture in terms of a church building that would be familiar to you, right? But if you walked into this place for the first time, which is almost impossible to imagine, unless you did last night. Anybody in here walking into this church for the first time? I don't think so, right? But imagine walking into this church for the first time, and you looked around, and you asked yourself, what are these people saying about what they believe about God by the kinds of buildings that they have? And what would you say? Have you ever thought about that? Yeah? Okay. What would you say? Well, what do you think our buildings say about what we think about God? Or theology?
Maybe not so much about specifically,
Okay.
but you see walk in and see, okay, this is an egalitarian space.
Okay.
Where it's approachable.
Okay.
Making best use
Okay.
of what we have as
Yeah.
opposed to storing, something that, so there's no iconography on the
Okay.
walls, there's no declarations, so there's nothing really that tells the story visually.
Right.
So we have to be very word focused.
Okay.
We have to communicate visually. I talk a lot.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, that's really good thoughts. Thoughts as well?
So I think one thing that we'll see in our church that's different from the ancient churches
Okay.
is the church, the building itself, like borrowed from the Old Testament, in that its grandeur is supposed to speak to the glory of God.
Okay.
Whereas the glory of God is now within us.
Okay.
So we don't put that grandeur to the church building.
Okay. Yeah. I think you're on the right track. I mean, I think we've had conversations even as a staff about that. One of the values that we have, I'll come right back to you, Mark, but one of the values that we have as a church is something you were talking about, April, is that this is a place that is used for all kinds of different things, right? There's a school that meets in all of these rooms during the week, and we try to make the most use of this for hours during the week. So it is utilitarian in a sense, right? That we want something that is a place that can be occupied by God's people, right? That can be used and it's durable, I guess, in that way too, right? That it isn't gaudy or expensive in a sense as well, right? So there is some value that is expressed in that. I'm going to come back to you, but it has some work first. What do you get?
Yeah, just a place where it's like there's no images.
Okay.
Idol worship.
Yeah, there's no images because that's something that we would stay away from in terms of idol worship, or what we would think about as idol worship, right? Yeah, good. Go ahead. Marla, what was your thought? Go ahead.
We're inviting generations.
Okay. Yeah, there's a mixture of people. Yeah, that's true. So there are spaces on this campus that are specific for kids, right? That have playground equipment or like a gym. We have on campus as well. So for people to play in and all that. So yeah, it does say something about what we think and believe about God. And I spent already too much time on that, but I appreciate that you've thought about that, right? But other traditions think differently about what a church building does. And one of the values that a cathedral has, for instance, is to make you feel small when you walk in. Why do they build a huge building? It's because they want to remind you that you are small and God is big. And then it can draw your attention upward. And again, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, right? There are other ways to express these same ideas. But that's one of the things, at least, they would say was what they were intending to do, is to make you feel small and that you are, coming in humbly before a God who is much bigger than you. And so get your attention drawn upwards and up towards heaven. So they have soaring ceilings, those kinds of things, in order to do that. Again, not a lot of right and wrong in some of these things, but it is different and something that we would need to learn to understand and appreciate if we were even going to understand what we were looking at when we walked into a place like that. Okay? What I want you to think about too is this idea: what is the church? What is the church? Right? It is the people. Who said that? Yeah, it's the people, right? Yeah, Debbie, right? You don't go to church. You are the church, right? We are the church. And that's, again, I think something that we try to express in the kinds of buildings that we have, or the kinds of buildings that we don't have. It's not about the building, it's about the people who gather in that building, in our tradition. And so that's something that I think we have to remember as well. The body of Christ is hard to find in the land of Israel today. If you go there, it's really hard to find biblical church there. There are Messianic Jews, there are other congregations of people as well who are actual true believers in Christ, but it's a small minority compared to most of the people in Israel. However, there are a number of church buildings that we will come across. And actually, a lot of groups, there are Catholic groups that go, Orthodox groups that go to Israel, and a lot of them, they have on their itinerary the buildings that they're going to go to. And that's kind of the central focus of what they want to go and see. And a lot of these buildings are built by famous architects, according to famous designs, and stretching some of those designs and interpretations of those, so that they see these things as works of art, but also as pointing them towards worship and drawing something of worship out of them. Okay? And I would say that our trip to Israel, we don't do that. In fact, I very vividly remember one particular day, and I think it was in 2018. We were with a group, and it was a small group, and it wasn't 2018. I'm sorry, it was 2021, I think. Now I can't remember what it was. I remember vividly the time, but I don't remember what year it was. And we went to two churches back to back, and one of those was on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Actually, both of them were on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. This was the place that was supposed to be the place where Jesus fed his disciples after the resurrection. Remember, they had the miraculous catch of fish, and then Jesus was on the shoreline. Peter saw him out there and said, he gets out of the boat and runs to the shore to go greet Jesus, right? And so there's a rock there at the base of this church where they said this is where Jesus prepared the fish to feed the disciples. And so we went into this, we went near this church because we wanted to get down to the beach. There was a nice little beach down there with access to the Sea of Galilee. And there was a friar, I now always call him the grumpy friar, who refused to open up the gate for us to get down to the beach. And so I was just talking with my group, and I just sent Matt, our tour guide, over. I said, "Can we go talk to him, ask him if he would open the gate?" And Matt said, "Yeah, he's not going to open the gate for us." And I said, "Did you talk to him?" He said, "Yeah, I talked to him." He said, "There's no way I'm opening the gate for you guys." I said, "Okay, why not?" And he said, "Well, because you guys didn't come in and kiss the rock where Jesus prepared the fish. And that's what this place is all about." And I told Matt, I said, "We didn't come here to kiss rocks or walk into church buildings. That's not, I mean, we've come to encounter Jesus, but not to touch the places he touched necessarily, although that is something we endeavor to do too." Okay, so that was one experience. Just from there, we went to Magdala, and Father Kelly, anybody meet Father Kelly? You guys familiar with Father Kelly? So he's an Irish priest there at Magdala, and he just takes great pride in being the priest of this particular church. It's a beautiful church, and he's the most friendly, most outgoing Catholic priest you're ever going to meet. Has a beautiful Irish accent, and very evangelical in his approach to people. And so we had the grumpy friar followed immediately by Father Kelly, and it was just such a huge contrast of the two different styles. And I was just kind of wanting to get Friar Kelly, or Father Kelly, together with Grumpy Friar, and have them kind of talk it out and maybe into a medium. Father Kelly could take all of your day, and we had to actually kind of say, we have other places we got to go today, Father Kelly, so if you wouldn't mind, cutting your presentation a little short, we're moving on, but just to have those two kind of come together. But that's the kind of contrast that I feel a lot in the church buildings when we go to Israel. And a lot of them, again, you wonder what we as evangelicals can get out of that, and yet, what I found is that the Catholic Church, largely, especially the Franciscan order of the Catholic Church, has gone to great lengths to try to preserve places that are authentic places for biblical events in history. And so we actually owe them a great deal of debt because they have, for centuries, decided they're going to preserve that place, and they have. And so one of the reasons they haven't disappeared, one of the reasons we still know where these places are, is because there's a church that is built on top of that spot. And that's what I want to introduce you to this today. Remember we talked a lot of weeks ago now about what a tell was. Remember a tell, and I've talked about it over and over again. It's one thing built on top of another, right? Like a layer cake over time. And that's how we know then that there's layers of civilization that go back down beneath. When we go to a place like that, we can do archaeology, dig down, even all the way to bedrock, and see all those different layers of civilization that are there. But it also works the other way, going forward. Okay? So even biblical events and places that are of huge significance, especially in the life of Christ, those places have been revered for now 2,000 years. And so now there are layers of things that are built one on top of another over those years to get it down to our day and age as well. And so you can go to Israel, and it would be really easy for somebody to buy a plot of land, decide this is the place where Jesus put the fish on the Sea of Galilee, right? And then charge people to come and kiss the rock in that church. But and when we go to a place like that, you might say, well, why should I pay you how do I know that this is the right place, the right rock, right? You could pick any old rock and claim it's that rock, okay? But, and there is a place like that, one that I think is particularly funny. It's in Joppa, Simon the Tanner's house. You walk down into this street, and you come to a place, and you remember who Simon the Tanner was? Who was Simon the Tanner? Acts chapter 10. You guys remember?
Peter stayed with him.
Yeah, Peter stayed with him, right? So when Peter had that vision of the animals coming down in the sheep, right? And then he's directed to go to Cornelius' house in Caesarea. That happened in Joppa at Simon the Tanner's house. That's where he was staying when that happened. And so you go there now, walk through the streets of Joppa, all of a sudden you come across a door where it's hand-painted in English, the home of Simon the Tanner. And you look at that and you say, that doesn't look like an authentic spot. That's just some guy trying to get some money from an American tourist for that. And actually even yesterday, I had somebody say, why would I go to Israel? How would we know that these places are authentic, right? I'm going to be in the ballpark, in the neighborhood, but how do I know that this is actually a place where Jesus was? I think, honestly, if we never knew any of the places where Jesus was, it still would be really impactful to go to Israel, because you would see the backdrop, the stage of where these things happen. Geography hasn't changed that much over 2,000 years, right? There has been, obviously storms and rain and all that kind of stuff, erosion that's taken place, but you would still know how far it was from Nazareth down to Jerusalem, from the Sea of Galilee to Bethlehem. That you would get those kinds of things, even if there weren't these kinds of authentic places to go to. But, you guys, there are places where you can know for sure that these are actually authentic places. And I want to take you to a couple of those right now. So I'm going to move us through all the way to slide number 2. We're already at 7:30. I want to do a little bit of review for you, just in terms of locations here. Just to remind you again that we've been moving our way up from on the coastal plain here in the screen section. We moved up to Mount Carmel here over the Jezreel Valley. We talked about the Sea of Galilee and went around there. Went up a little bit further north to Hatzor. Then we've been coming down this Rift Valley where we went down through the Jordan River area. We went to Beit Shan together, went to Jericho, around the Dead Sea, and moved our way down this way. Last week we were over here in the Shpeilah and talked about Lachish, and then worked our way up sort of to Jerusalem, which is where we're going to spend most of our time over the next few weeks. So just to give you a recap of the places that we've been and what this looks like, and how to find those things on a map. This star, of course, is where? Jerusalem, right? So if you don't know anything else from this class so far, you know where Jerusalem is and how to find Jerusalem on that map. So just a quick recap of that for you. And I just want to mention some of those places that we've talked about again. Tel Aviv is the place where you land. That's where the airport is. Caesarea, we talked about being that man-made harbor built by Herod the Great here on the Mediterranean Sea. And we talked about Megiddo and the 22 to 26 to 30 layers. There's a lot of debate about how many layers exactly there are at Megiddo. We talked a lot about that. And the Jezreel Valley that's down below it. We kind of skipped over Nazareth, but that's what we're coming back to tonight. We did talk about Capernaum and Magdala on the Sea of Galilee. So this is just to orient you again to where Nazareth is. And that's what, it's just really straight northeast of Megiddo here, across the Jezreel Valley. Both Megiddo sits up on the Mount Carmel range, a big mountain range, about 30 miles long that runs right through here, right? Nazareth sits across the Jezreel Valley on another hillside, and I'm going to take you to what that looks like. Again, this is Megiddo, the tell, down here, kind of at the level at the bottom of the Jezreel Valley. We're up a little bit higher than that. But this is the Jezreel Valley that runs through there. You can see the farmland through here. You can actually see the runways from the Air Force Base here as well. And then you've got Mount Tabor here, a rounded hill, fairly good view of it there. The hill of Moreh over here, which had the villages of Nain and Endor down here as well. And then the Nazareth Ridge is over here. So you can see this whole ridge system on this side is Nazareth. And so Jesus, when he grew up in a saddle of a ridge right here where he would have been able to overlook the Jezreel Valley down below him there. Okay, so that's kind of an idea about what Nazareth looks like across the Jezreel Valley. It's a little bit like when you look across from here to up to Tehachapi, the range over there, although the hills over at Tehachapi will be higher than the Nazareth Ridge by quite a bit. Okay, so you get a little bit of a sense of what that looks like across our valley from there. All right, you'll get to know that place better when we get there, Lord willing. All right, this is what Nazareth looks like when you get a little bit closer in. This is modern Nazareth, which has about 70,000 people now. So it's a big modern city right here, sitting in that ridge. Okay? In Jesus' day, the city of Nazareth was a tiny little village right here. The city was a village. How many people do you think lived in Nazareth? Don't answer if you already know, but how many people lived in Nazareth in the first century, you think? Yeah, so about 100 to 200 people is what we think is the size of Nazareth in the first century. It would have been all in this little area right here. The reason I know that is because there's a church right here that sits over almost the entire first century village of Nazareth right there. Okay? It's a modern church, and that's where we're headed to now. I'm going to zoom in on a little bit, but before I do that, I had to put in this picture of sheep outside of Nazareth too. It's cool. This is a ridge up here with the sheep grazing on it, and then again across this ridge valley over here is the modern city of Nazareth here, which is a growing city, largely populated by Palestinians, but there are many Palestinian Christians who live there as well. All right, let me zoom in a little bit more. And that church that I was talking about, this is it right here. Does it remind you of anything actually as you look at it? This kind of spire right there. Looks like a lighthouse a little bit, doesn't it? Can you see it right here? This is the base of it here, and that's got a tower, a grayish tower that sticks up here. Kind of blends in with its backdrop a little bit, but this is the Church of the Annunciation. And I believe when we stay there this year, I think we're in a hotel right here. You'll be able to still see the Church of the Annunciation right out the back windows of the hotel room when you wake up in the morning. It's really a fascinating, wonderful place to be. Okay, so this is the Church of the Annunciation, and I want to get you a little bit up closer to it, a little bit better view now, so you can see now kind of the lighthouse idea here. And that's a part of the architect's intention was to make it look like a lighthouse. And actually up here as well, it's almost like a focus of the light that then comes straight down through this spire down into the bottom of this church here. And it's this idea of the light of the world, right? In fact, on the very front of the church, it's written in Latin, the word has indeed become flesh and dwells among us. And so it's the light of the world that's come in through the darkness that pierces down through this, lights up the middle of that church. It's really well done, actually. Beautiful church and thoughtful architecture. As you look at this, does this look like a church that was built in the Middle Ages? Could be maybe the Crusader period in the 1100s. When do you think this church was built? Just having a look at it from the outside. Any ideas? Go ahead.
About 1750.
1750, all right. Anybody want to go higher? Any bids going higher than that?
1900s.
Yeah, it's 1900s. 1960 actually is when this church was built. Okay, right here on this spot. So it's a very modern church, built in the 1960s by the Franciscans. They put a lot of money into it. In fact, this is the largest building, church building in the Middle East. Largest Christian church building in the Middle East in terms of its square footage area of it. Okay? And it was built in the 1960s. And one of the great things about that is that when they built the church, there was a church underneath it. It was one that was not too much older than, it was probably about 200, 250 years, about 1750s, 1780s was when it was built. And it was in disarray, and it was falling apart. And so the town council actually wanted to completely get rid of the building, and the Catholics came in and they said, no, we're going to refurbish it. We're going to build something new on top of it. Fortunately, in the 1960s, archaeology was already developed as a science. If this had been done in the 1750s or 1850s even, it would have been done very differently. But because it was done in the 1960s, those who came in to build the building said, because we have this opportunity to take and get rid of what was there before, we can do archaeology in that place. And that's extremely rare, right? If you have a beautiful church building, or even somebody's home that's built on top of a spot that you'd like to excavate, well, how do you tell somebody, yeah, I gotta get out of your house so that I can dig up underneath it, right? And actually, this is a real issue in a lot of Israel, because many archaeological sites are under people's fields, where they make their living from growing their crops on those fields. Old Testament Bethel, one of the most important cities in the Old Testament, the second most named city in all of the Old Testament. It is now somebody's field. It's a huge field that needed to be excavated, and actually was in the early 20th century. But after they excavated it, they had to bury it again so that the people could go on doing making their livelihood there, right? Growing their crops there. So when they built this building, they said, okay, we have a unique opportunity to do archaeology in this place, to actually see how far back it goes. They knew that there was that 1760 church that was built on that spot. They knew that there had been a church built in the Middle Ages in that spot, but it had burned down, so it had to be reconstructed. And they knew, at least from old records, that there was a church back there as far as the Byzantine period. Byzantines. Now this is something we need to talk about. We've talked in the Old Testament about the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, right? But in the New Testament, all those ages go away. And really what we have is a bunch of different eras that come up on top of each other. And when we're talking about church-related things, really we need to talk about the Crusades. Well, let's talk about the Byzantines first, then the Crusades, and then really it's the Middle Ages after that, okay? Well, there's also Muslim periods that go on in the Old Testament, in the land of Israel. And so there's various people who come and go between that time of Christ and our time. And really the ones we need to know about are the Byzantines, which is about 300. Anybody know how the Byzantine period started? Who's associated with that? Constantine, right? Yeah, so Emperor Constantine. Why is Emperor Constantine important? He's a Roman emperor, okay? What was unique about him as a Roman emperor?
He's a Christian.
Yeah, he's the first Christian Roman emperor, okay? So he converted to Christianity early on in his reign, about 324 AD, okay? And not that he made Christianity immediately the state religion, but he made it legal for Christianity to exist. Before that, Christianity had always been technically illegal within the Roman Empire. Okay, so when Constantine comes into power, he makes Christianity legal, which means that for the very first time, Christians can build buildings. Right? There were never Christian church buildings before the 4th century AD. Why not? Like if you build a church building, you're just saying, come in and persecute us, kill us, right? This is the place where you can find the Christians. And so they met in people's homes. They met early on, they met in synagogues, right? We see that in the New Testament. They met in people's homes. They met in the temple courts. Sometimes they just met out in places out by the river or whatever that might be. And we find that that's how Philippi started. When Paul went to Philippi, he found believers meeting down by the river, okay? And so the first time they could actually build church buildings is in the 4th century, especially starting in about 325 AD. All right, this is called the Byzantine period because Constantine made his capital at Byzantium, renamed it Constantinople. Today, what is it called? Istanbul, right? Makes me think of a song from the 80s, but I don't sing it for you.
They might be giants.
They might be giants. Good job. Right. Special treat for you after class, I guess. All right. No, now I'm all distracted by that.
I saw them live when I was 15.
Did you?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. All right. Back on track here. That's the Byzantines. And that, again, that era doesn't last all that long. It's only 150 to 200 years. And then the Roman Empire actually completely collapses after that. And then it's going to be quite a while there is a Muslim period that happens especially in the Holy Land. Okay, the Muslims come in and take over that area. And they make it very difficult for Christians to continue to build buildings. There are Christians who are living in the land all the way from the time of Christ up until our day. And so there were people who were living locally here in Nazareth who were Christians who knew this area well, but oftentimes living in secret and just keeping their own kind of culture surviving. Okay? After the Byzantines, we have to wait really until the time of the Crusades, which is about 1099 is when the Crusades begin. So think about 11th century, 12th century for the Crusades. And this is a time when Europeans come back into the land and they take over the Promised Land again. There's all kinds of thoughts and opinions about that area of history. I won't get into that much. We don't have time for that. But at least part of their desire is to make it possible for Christian pilgrims to come back to the land, to visit the place where Jesus had ministered. Okay? And so they come back into this land and they rebuild churches that had, or replace churches or refurbish churches that had been left by the Byzantines in the period before them. Right? Those are the things I want you to understand about. Let's move to the next picture then. This is the front of that. And this is, again, in Latin here, verbum caro factum est, and habitabat in nobis. So the word has indeed become flesh and dwelt among us. Okay? Inside, this is the entrance into the Church of the Annunciation. And so what you find when you go into there is that there is one thing built on top of another. Okay? This is a phrase that I want you to get to understand and to appreciate. So just like we had again with the tells, one thing built on top of another, we have that here in this church as well. And when they came in to do the reconstruction in the 1960s, they said we want to preserve some of the things that have been left from former church buildings here. So as they did the excavation, they found a wall from the Crusader church. And they said, okay, we're going to keep that wall exactly where we found it, right? And preserve it as a part of the internal part of this church. They said we also found an apse from the Byzantine church. Okay? An apse is a rounded half circle that's usually found at the front of a church. Sometimes they have one apse, sometimes two, but usually either one or three apses at the front of the church. The apse usually was built over the spot that the church is meaning to commemorate. So for instance, Dave, right, when you go to Jacob's Well, the apse of the church that's on top of Jacob's Well will sit on top of the well, and then the church kind of extends from there. So the apse is usually kind of an X marks the spot for the thing that they were trying to preserve after that. Okay? So they found an apse from a Byzantine church from the 4th century. They also found that they kept digging after that. They dug up the floor of what they found from the Byzantine church, and underneath it, they found a 1st century synagogue church. Now, think about this. How do you have a synagogue church, right? A synagogue is a Jewish place of worship and gathering, right? A gathering. Actually, guys, the word synagogue actually is talking about the people, just like the church is talking about people. It's the people who gather together. But synagogues were buildings built by Jews to be places of worship. This particular one, though, let's see if I have a picture of it. Yeah. It had this mosaic in it. And you can't see it real well in here, but this symbol right here is what came to be known the Chi Rho, which is exactly what Constantine said he saw in the sky that led him to become a Christian. And basically it's the first two letters in Greek of Jesus' name, Chi Rho, for Christ. So it's basically like RX or a T in this here with a P loop on top of it. And so they found this as a 1st century synagogue floor, which means that the people who were worshiping here were worshiping Jesus as the Christ, but in a synagogue setting. This is before Christianity was made illegal. In the 1st century, early on especially, because Christianity and Judaism hadn't been differentiated yet, right? When he went and did his missionary journeys, where did he almost always go first when he went into a city? He went into the synagogue, right? And explained to them from the Old Testament what they needed to know about Christ, and then filled in the rest of the story for them. And actually, many people were converted from Judaism to Christianity, and they actually saw themselves as Jewish Christians, not differentiating those things, until about 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed. And that really forced the issue for people to decide whether they were Christians or whether they were Jews going forward. And it gave the Romans an opportunity to say, no, Judaism will continue to tolerate, but Christianity we're going to make illegal. Okay? So before that happened, this floor was put in the synagogue. And they said, okay, well, that's great. We have the floor from a first century synagogue church. Why would they build a synagogue in this place? And you guys, this doesn't take a lot of math to figure out, right? If you're in Nazareth and you build a synagogue, a Christian synagogue, on top of a place, what place in Nazareth are you going to build that place over? What happened in Nazareth? Jesus grew up there, right? So you would build it over Jesus' home. That would be the place that you would want to be commemorating. And so they kept digging underneath this floor, and they found underneath this graffiti written by Jesus. Jesus was here, right? That's not really, just trying to make sure you guys are still paying attention.
Awake.
All right, so underneath, you know what they found? They found a mikvah. What's a mikvah, right? Anybody know what a mikvah is?
It's the thing on the doorway.
No, those are, that's a mezuzah.
Oh, the mikveh is the bath.
Yeah, it's a ritual bath,
Yeah.
right? That was used by Jews throughout the Holy Land as a place for ritual cleansing, usually before or after a meal, but whatever, rich or actually not even rich, but practicing Jewish homes would have this in the first century as a part of their house. It would be a place for ritual purification, basically like a hot tub that you would walk down into and walk back up out of. You have to completely immerse yourself in these. And we'll see examples of that all over Israel when we go. And so they found a mikvah under this, which helped them to understand that this was a house that they had built this synagogue on top of. And it was a practicing religious Jewish house from the first century. Again, if you're going to build a synagogue on top of a place to commemorate it, what other place would you build it on except for on Jesus' house? So we have, all the way back from the first century, we have a floor of a synagogue built on top of a house. So we're not guessing about, when would we build a church in the 1960s? We would say, okay, well, there was a church built here in the Crusader period in the 1200s. There was an earlier church built here in the 320s, and there was an earlier church built here in the first century, and that's all the way back to Jesus' day, right? All right. I'm going to steal this from Joel Kramer. I've heard me say this a bunch of times, but imagine you took a taxi. Let's say you went to New York, right? You get out of the airport, and you say to the taxi driver, take me to ground zero. I want to see the place where 9/11 happened. Would a taxi driver be able to take you to that place? Right? Absolutely they would, right? Let's say you went in another 20 years and did the same thing. Would they be able to tell you and take you to the right spot? Let's say it's 100 years from now. Do you think they'd still be able to take you to the same spot? Right? Okay, so is it likely that Christians who have lived in Nazareth since the very time of Christ would have forgotten where Jesus grew up? You would have passed that down from generation to generation to generation. Certainly at least long enough for this church to be built on top of that, right? And then for a Byzantine church to be built on top of that. And then for a Crusader church to be built on top of that. And so what they've done in this church, which I think is brilliant, and I'm really thankful for, it's the only place that I know that the Catholics did this, is that they built a church that incorporates all of those churches in it. This is the wall. This is the wall from the Crusader church that they left there. This is the apse from the Byzantine church. So this wall is from 1100 or so AD. This apse down here is from 325 or a little bit after that AD. And there's a mikvah at the other end of this. I don't know if I've got a good shot of it here. Well, it's near this floor, and actually I don't have a shot of the mikvah. But it's right near this floor, actually it might be back here, where the mikvah is from the very first part of the first century. Okay. So how do we know that this is an authentic spot? We have testimony going all the way back to within a few years of the time when Jesus was in this place, right? And I love that they have preserved those things for you here. One of the weird things about this Church of the Annunciation is that they have signs all over the place telling you not to make a sound. And so the challenge for me as a teacher there is to try to help to explain to people what's happening in there so that when they walk in, they'll be able to see it. So you almost have to do it before and after, because then people get in there and say, well, where's the mikvah? Where's the mosaic? What wall was that from? What's an apse? And what's all that about, right? So you have to do a little bit of work, and that's part of the reason that I bring that to you guys here tonight, is now you've got an idea, you have a place. Yeah, it's a good idea, Mary. You should have little things to hold up, and I do have some little things to hold up.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. You got them right here. My silent little, see if I can show people these things. See? This is what you're seeing. This is the mosaics within there. And this is, again, how to see. And this is why I have you take Kramer with you, his book, Where God Came Down, and so you'll be able to walk in there and see these things too. This will be in the book that you're looking at. Okay, so this is what I've tried to show you in these slides too, but we'll do that one on the spot there too. All right, so that's the Church of the Annunciation. And I think we can know with 99.9% certainty that this is actually the place where Jesus grew up. And what's interesting, you guys, is so Doug Bookman, who is my mentor, taught me how to do Israel trips. He doesn't even go to this place. I've never been able to figure out why. I really think this is a really interesting place to go to see the layers of things that have been preserved here as well. One more thing I want to show you. Underneath this church, so they built these pillars up around to support the base of the church, but these are the actual rest of the village of Nazareth. See these caves down here? All of the rest of this is first century Nazareth, and they've done a good job of building the church up high enough that you can actually go down and look underneath, and you can see first century Nazareth underneath this church building. And because it was only 100 to 200 people, and because we have the spring that fed Nazareth, we know that the town where the town was located in the first century, because the spring hasn't moved, they would have been near the freshwater source, and it's right here, accessible. So all of this points to the fact that this was first century Nazareth, and you know where that was. I'm going to stop and see if you guys have any questions about the Church of the Annunciation.
So how big would the house be?
How big would a house been? That's a good question. Actually, it would have been really close to the size of this room, maybe a little bit smaller. An Israelite house, well, so Nazareth maybe probably quite a bit smaller. I mean, would have been maybe a third of this in a village that size. Okay? Israelites became known for building a particular kind of house in future generations, and it was called a four-room house. And so basically it had, so you would have one wall here, you would have a line of pillars here, another line of pillars there, and another wall that way. And it was kind of divided into sections that way. And they had, so these pillars then were like temporary walls. And if you wanted to have privacy within your house, you would actually hang animal skins inside there. But then you'd be able to take those out to rearrange your rooms, basically. So you'd hang the animal skins between the pillars to kind of divide things off when you wanted to divide them. But then you could always put up things for privacy and other things as well within that house. So it was kind of a functional, but easily rearrangeable house as well. In today's culture in the Middle East, and this was true in the old first century as well, that oftentimes the next generation would come and build a part of that house too. And so they would build on top of it. You often see in the West Bank today buildings that have rebar sticking out of the top. And people say, well, why didn't they finish the buildings? And it's because that first generation is inviting the second generation to build on a second story of that house when they come to that time in their marriage. Okay, so they left it unfinished on purpose so that the next generation can build on top. And we can get hints of that and the marriage things that we come across in the first century too, about Joseph preparing a house for Mary and those kinds of things. And actually Jesus preparing a house for us too, right? That will have many rooms. So you can understand he's building on generations worth of houses that we can all then live together within our village as well. Okay. Other questions, you guys, about Church of the Annunciation or authenticity? Go ahead.
Is photography allowed by the visitors?
Inside the church?
Inside.
I think so in the Church of the Annunciation. There are other places that don't allow you to do that. I remember, for instance, Church of All Nations on the bottom of the Mount of Olives, they don't let you do photography in there. So there are some that don't allow you to do photography, but almost all of them do. So, and I think I have video inside of this. So I don't think they prohibit you from taking pictures in there. Well, Joel Kramer took some pictures in there too. Yes. So this is actually a modern two-story church. Okay, so the pictures that I showed you were of the bottom floor, which really isn't used for services, although sometimes they have services in there. But there's a top floor on top of that that looks much more like a modern Catholic church building that has pews and all of that, and they conduct services in there. Now, there's not a large congregation of Christians, especially Catholic Christians, within Nazareth. So oftentimes those are used by groups that come in and request that. You have to be Catholic in order to have a service in there, but you can request a time to do that and hold a service within there too. So yeah, there are still modern services happening there. All right, I'm gonna store up your questions. We'll come back to it, but I need to leave some time for Church of the Holy Sepulchre as well. I'm gonna let my whistle a little bit before I get to that. All right, so again, my aim here is not to tell you everything there is to know about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's only to try to get your feet a little bit wet. And this is because when you get there, it will be overwhelming. And even no matter how many times I explain it to you ahead of time, I'm still going to ask you to go 2 or 3 or 4 times into this place, because it takes that many times to try to figure out what in the world you're looking at, and to try to get past the noise and all of the stuff that goes on there, and to try to come to a place of really appreciating it. So I'm going to give us a start on that, but my intention tonight is actually to follow my own rule, which is less is more. The more I tell you, the more confusing it gets. So I'm going to try to avoid giving you too much information. So this is an aerial view of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And really what you're looking at here, this is the front entrance right here, down below. Actually, this roof kind of covers the entrance. You can see these 2 arches down here. That's the actual modern entrance to the church. This is the basilica side of it. And then you've got 2 gray domes. You see these 2 gray domes right here? Those are really the central part of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I want to try to explain to you how it came to be like it is today. It's actually a hodgepodge and a bit of a mess right now. This bell tower here is a part of the church now as well. These rooms here were built on later on. There's ladders you can see going up in different places here. There's a ladder going up right here that has quite an interesting history to it, which we'll have to talk about when we get there. There's actually there's a village on top of the roof of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A village of Ethiopian monks who live up on top of the church, because that's the only space that they can get in the church. So it's a really interesting place. This is kind of a floor plan of it, and you can see how complicated and convoluted it really is, right? This is that entrance. There's actually a courtyard right here, which unfortunately now is often covered with, they're doing a lot of, renovations of the church. And so you see there's often garbage and all that kind of stuff that's in this courtyard here. And it's usually a mess. But then the entrance here, that big dome, that big gray dome, and let me go back to that first picture. See this big gray dome right here? Okay, that one covers this right here. Okay? That's over the top of this. And this is a rotunda, so you've got a number of different columns that come in a circle around it, and a little building inside the building that's called the edicule. Okay? I'm just let me explain these places to you, and then I'll try to tell you what they mean. Okay? As you come into the entrance, if you turned immediately right, you would see a stairway that walks up the right up here to a chapel, a couple of chapels that are up on top of this section right here. All right. This is another basilica here with another dome right here. Okay, so we have 2 gray domes, right? Sorry about that. I'm going to push the wrong button. Push the right button. There we go. So 2 gray domes, right? A big one and a smaller one, right? When we go back inside, or look at the floor plan, right? This is the big gray dome over here, and the smaller gray dome would be right here. You guys getting all this down? This is all going to be on your quiz, so make sure you're getting this down, right? And from there, you have another chapel, actually a series of chapels that wends its way back this way, and actually goes down a set of stairs into a basement area, and it's just a convoluted mess, to tell you the truth, right? Not only that, but it smells in there. Always there is, and I've come to really enjoy the smell. It's an incense, the particular kind of incense they only use within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So if I ever smell it, I think, that reminds me of that place and that time. All right. So the basic things that we understand here: edicule. Okay. This is the upstairs chapel, and then between them is this thing called the stone of anointing that is right here. That's basically the first thing you see when you walk in. You'll see a marble slab on the floor that's called the stone of anointing or the stone of unction. Okay? Weird, right? All kinds of weird stuff. All right, let me move forward a little bit and help, try to explain that to you. This is just getting those two things side by side. So the two domes right here, right? Big dome over this part, little dome over this part. And this is the entrance. So this is what you're looking at here. Entrance is down here. You guys all experts in the Church of the Holy Spirit right now? You know your way around? You can reproduce this drawing on the quiz next week if you had to. Perfect. Everybody sketch this in your sketchbooks and we'll see how you do. All right, let me show you how it came to be this way. Now, taking your mind back to, this is in your notes, taking your mind back to 30 AD, okay, the time of the crucifixion, 30 to 33 AD. Okay, this is what it would have looked like. Jerusalem's walls would have come to about this point here, okay? Just outside of those walls, in fact, there would have been a gate right here, and a way to get outside of the city walls to a place called Calvary. Now, I have to argue even with my own diagram here. I didn't draw this diagram, but I have to argue even with the diagram here. We have come to understand that Calvary was on a hill, right? A hill called Calvary. That's actually an assumption made by the translators of our Bible from Latin into English. The hill of Calvary. There's nothing in the actual text in Greek that says that Calvary was a hill. So I don't know, I hope that doesn't ruin any of your favorite songs or anything like that, but it could have been a hill. There's just nothing in the actual text of Scripture that says that it was a hill. Okay? But that's what this is showing here, is Calvary as a hill with 3 crosses on top of it. Okay? Then, just a stone's throw away, literally, is Jesus' tomb here. What do we know from Scripture about Jesus' tomb? We're not going to go to the Scripture on it, but I want to see if we can recall it.
Never been used.
Okay, so it is a tomb that's never been used, right? Yeah, that's good. It was in a garden tomb, right? And it was outside the walls, right? Crucifixions certainly happened outside the walls, and burials certainly happened outside the walls of a Jewish city in that time. Okay, does that make sense to you? Okay, we know maybe a little bit more than that from Scripture. We know there was Joseph and Arimathea who owned the tomb, right? Had never been used. Actually, Scripture does tell us the tomb was nearby the place of crucifixion in the garden. Okay? Just how nearby it was is, I don't know, again, your imagination, right? As you think about this, how close would you imagine it to be? You almost certainly wouldn't imagine it to be as close as it actually is. It really is less than 150, 200 feet, somewhere in that area. Okay? It's very, very close, the place of crucifixion and the place of burial. Right? So this is what this is showing. This is what it looked like in 30 AD. Right? Let me go forward in time a little bit. Again, in your notes. Push the way. I'm going backwards. Let me go forward. Okay? Now, this is what happened to this place. All right, remember that Jerusalem is destroyed by Rome in 70 AD, right? By the Romans in 70 AD. Remember this? And the temple is completely destroyed. Every building on top of the temple is thrown down, right? The Romans want to completely get rid of the Jewish resistance that they're getting. And so they really kick all the Jews out of the entire Holy Land at that time. But over time, especially the Christians come back into the city of Jerusalem and they start living there again. And the Jews do as well. And again, they start to revolt against Rome. And this comes to a head in 135 AD when Hadrian, a Roman emperor, he says, okay, we're going to get rid of the Jewish and Christian problem once and for all. I'm going to go in and completely level the whole city of Jerusalem and rebuild a Roman city on top of it. I'm going to call it Aelia Capitolina. And I'm actually going to rename this place Palestine. It's not going to be Israel or Judah. It's going to be Palestine. Palestina is what he calls it from this point forward. He takes what had been a common name for the geography of that place anyway. We saw the plain of Philistia, right? He uses that Philistia, and actually that idea of the Philistines, knowing that that is offensive to the Jews, he says, I'm going to call this place Palestine, after the Philistines, okay? And he hates Christians, but he hates even more the Jews, okay? And so when he gets to this place, he says, I'm going to make sure that I defile every place that was important to Christians and Jews. And so he doesn't know anything about Christianity, but he does know, when he comes there, he sees that there's the Temple Mount that is still there. And so he says, what I'm going to do on the Temple Mount is I'm going to build a pagan shrine to Jupiter, to myself up on that mountain. Okay. So this beautiful platform where they have this beautiful temple, I'm going to build a temple to myself up on top of that. And he says, when he gets to town, he says, tell me, Christians, what is the most important place to you? He kind of tricks them into telling them that. And they say, well, it's the place of the crucifixion and burial and resurrection of Christ. And so he says, okay, well, I'm going to build a Roman shrine on top of that place. What he does is he builds a wall, a retaining wall, all the way around all of this, okay? And then he buries it. He brings in all kinds of rubble, debris, but mostly just dirt, and he packs it in top of this retaining wall. So he builds a big rectangular wall around the whole thing, and then he fills over it with dirt, and then he paves on top of it with paved stones, okay? And then he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a statue of Jupiter right on top of where the place of the crucifixion was, and I'm going to put a statue of Venus in a temple right on top of the spot where the burial place of Christ was. He said, I'm going to bury it forever. Nobody will ever know where these things took place. What's wrong with that, you guys? Right? So the Christians, now they're going to say, well, yeah, Hadrian completely destroyed our places, but he built on top of them these huge monuments. So you want to know where those places are? They're where these two things are standing, right? So this happens in 135, builds this, and then, again, we talked about the next big emperor who comes along, right? Who was that guy that we talked about? Constantine, right? When did he become emperor? About 325, 324 to 325, okay? He converts very quickly to Christianity, and especially his mother, Helena, is a strong Christian believer, okay? And so she asks permission of Constantine to go back to the land and to find the places that are important to the Christian faith. And she has a few places in mind. One of those is the birthplace of Christ in Bethlehem. One of them is this place, the crucifixion and resurrection site. And she also has the ascension site. And she says, I'm going to build church buildings on these three places. Now, there's a little bit of dispute about this. And actually, it's hard for me to understand when this really happened. Because Christian tradition actually says that the building was underway at this spot before Helena gets there. So somehow, they had started to build this building before Helena even got to Jerusalem. So there's a tradition that she came while it was already in process. So how do they know? So Constantine converts to Christianity. Now he wants to build buildings Christian buildings on top of these places, right? For the first time this is possible. How does he know where to find these places? He asks the local Christians, right? And the local Christian, he doesn't do it himself personally. Actually, he uses a man named Eusebius, who's a first Christian historian, lives in Caesarea, that first place that we talked about. And he says, Eusebius, I want you to go and research the places where I need to build these church buildings. And so Eusebius comes to Jerusalem. He asks the local Christians, where do I find the place of the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ? And the Christians say, well, it's underneath these statues of Jupiter and Temple of Venus. They write back to Constantine, and Constantine says, yeah, tear those places down immediately. In fact, he says, dig up all the dirt and throw it as far away from that place as you can possibly throw it, and then build a beautiful church on top of that place. Okay, so he gives permission for a church to be built there. And that's what happens. Here, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, for the first time, is built in about 325 AD. And he takes and he places it exactly, let me read to you what Eusebius says about what happened when he came to Jerusalem with Helena to find this place. I think it actually happened before that, but the tradition has moved it to the time of Helena a little bit later. In his book on the life of Constantine, it's actually called The Life of the Blessed Emperor Constantine, Eusebius of Caesarea in chapter 28 writes this: Discovery of the most holy sepulchre. This also was accomplished without delay, he says, but as soon as the original surface of the ground beneath the covering of earth appeared, immediately, and contrary to all expectation, the venerable and hallowed monument of our Savior's resurrection was discovered. What's he talking about there? He's talking about the cave in which Jesus was buried. He's talking about doing excavation in Jerusalem, the first known archaeological dig of all time, written down by Eusebius, authorized by Constantine to come and dig these things out so that they can find the original burial cave, which had been covered over, right, in order to make this platform for the temple built on top. You guys following along with me here? Okay. So this is what Eusebius says. Then indeed did the most holy cave present a faithful similitude of his return to life, in that after lying buried in darkness, it again emerged to light. So he's just envisioning it like this cave coming out of the ground, like Jesus came out of the cave, right? Out of the burial cave. So then indeed did the most holy cave present a faithful similitude of his return to life, in that after lying buried in darkness, it again emerged to light, and afforded to all who came to witness the sight a clear and visible proof of the wonders of which that spot had once been the scene, a testimony to the resurrection of the Savior, clearer than any voice could give. All right? So he builds this church. And he does it in two kind of sections here. The first is this rotunda, and it actually holds that same shape down to our day. So the floor plan of the church, of this part of the church, is the same then as it was, same today as it was then. We've got a little entrance coming in here. There's a courtyard here, and actually you can see that Calvary, Golgotha, was pictured about right here. Okay, and the church then had this rotunda and an open courtyard with the place of the crucifixion within that courtyard. Okay? And then another basilica that was built down this way. Right? So this is in 325. Now, this is what we have today, right? Still follows that rotunda with this edicule inside. This actually is over the burial place of Jesus within there. National Geographic, just a couple of years ago, went in and for the first time, they dug up the marble slab that sat on top of the supposed burial spot of Jesus. And they wanted to know if that marble slab had been, how long it had been there. And what they found underneath was evidence both from soil samples, but also from coins and other things that were in that area, that had actually, that marble slab was laid down in the 1st century, and underneath it was the original, limestone slab that was underneath that. So they think that this is exactly where that actual burial spot of Jesus was within this cave. And National Geographic, actually, a secular archaeological magazine, says that. So within this holy sepulcher inside the edicule here, you can find that now. Okay, so later on, now I think this actually happened probably at the time of the Crusaders, when they came and built the church here, or rebuilt the church here, refurbished it. They saw that there was only one place of bedrock sticking up out of the ground still, and they said that they thought that that must be what was left of Calvary, because they were thinking it's a hill, bedrock, all that kind of thing. But I think that Hadrian actually built this dome, or this part of that of his temple to Jupiter on top of that. So it should be here, but today they have it here. So it's only 25 feet away. But I think the actual most authentic spot for the crucifixion would have been right here. Crucifixion here, burial here. Okay? All right, I think that's what we needed from that. Let me move on one more idea here. Today, inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, when you walk in, go through the main entrance, you'll see the stone of anointing, and then behind it you see this mosaic. And it's a beautiful mosaic. I've always wanted to find a copy of it that I can hang up in my office. It was put in here just in the, I think it was the 1960s as well. And it provides a little bit of a visual map about how the church is laid out. And when you walk in, it's confusing. You can't tell what is what, why people are doing what they're doing. But this is meant to provide a visual map. What it shows here is the taking down from the cross. So this is showing the actual crucifixion spot. And as you're facing this, it would be off to your right. Also, as you're facing it, you would see the stone on the ground below you, which is called the stone of anointing, the unction stone. And what they're showing is Jesus, having been taken down from the cross, is prepared for burial on top of this slab. Now, I would say this probably isn't an authentic spot. It definitely wasn't a marble slab that Jesus was laid down on before he was put into the burial cave, because marble would have needed been imported from Italy. It didn't come in until much later than that. It is, of course, possible that Jesus was laid down in this spot to prepare him for burial, but there's really nothing that shows that to be authentic. Not necessary anyway. Okay? And then his body being placed inside of the cave, the tomb, this way, okay, the burial cave here. And that, as you face this, is off to your left. And so if you're paying attention, when you walk in, you see the mosaic. It's showing you how to understand the church without doing without words. Ironically, for some reason, the Church of the Annunciation doesn't let you say anything. It seems like you're like compelled to say stuff when you're inside this. There's so many people talking, so much going on inside inside of this place. So it's usually loud and crazy and chaotic in this place, which is one of those places where you wish it wasn't, honestly. But that gives you a little bit of a sense of what this looks like. Let me show you, so again, how the church is laid out. Let me show you what the church actually looks like. And this is what is over the place of the crucifixion now, which again is very difficult for us as evangelical Christians who have a very plain church, no iconography anywhere, right? No paintings anywhere. This is what you get when you come to the place of the crucifixion. And actually, I don't think it's the authentic place of the crucifixion. It's close, but not quite that. It's just the highest place of bedrock that still exists. Okay, so there's a stone down here. People will kneel down and kiss that stone, thinking that it's the place the crucifixion happened. Very close, but not actually there. And then all the icons, all the decorations in here, very shiny, very candles, all kinds of stuff in there. So lots to take in, lots to look at. Often extremely crowded as you walk into this little tiny chapel up there. But this is that place where go ahead.
Is this the room screen?
Yes. Yeah. And again, this whole church is filled with smaller chapels. So you've got so many of these chapels that have different kinds of things going on in there. There are 6 churches who have some stake within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's a Catholic church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Coptic, the Syriac, the Armenian, and there's one more that I always forget what it is. So I get 5 out of 6, so I get a bad grade on my quiz, but I don't probably know his name. Coptic, Syriac, Ethiopian, Greek Orthodox, Catholic. I'm telling you, there's one other one, I can't think of what it is.
Maronite?
No, not very nice, no.
Druze.
No, not Druze. Druze are Muslim. Anyway, you can look it up on, I don't know, the internet somewhere. Somebody use the Google machine, you'll find it there. All right, so that's what it looks like today. This is what that stone of anointing, the stone of unction, anointing stone looks like. It's got censers hanging over the top of it. You will almost never see it without people like kneeling and kissing it or rubbing oil on it and then rubbing something that they take back with them to pray over or use for anointing somebody. So you always see people clinging to that, and that's kind of what this looks like. So there again, that stone of anointing, and there's some kind of ceremony. It looks like a Greek Orthodox. No, it looks like a Catholic ceremony. It is a Catholic Easter service that is happening here. Okay, so all these different branches of Christianity, they have specific times and places where they can conduct services within the church. And actually, it's become a very contentious thing, unfortunately, and it's one of the things that Jews and Israelis in particular use to criticize Christianity, that we can't get along with one another very well. There's something called just lost the name of it, the status quo, which was written in the 1600s and says that in order for anything to change within the church, all 6 churches have to agree on it. And so if there's going to be any kind of renovation or change or whatever, all 6 churches, and they can't agree what day of the week it is, let alone on a change to make to the outside. And so unfortunately, this is an old church, things are falling apart. The Israel Antiquities Authority had to step in and say, this place is unsafe, and so you have to do renovations in here so that it doesn't collapse and kill a bunch of people. So they've had to force people to do that. And again, unfortunately, the Christians don't even have the keys to the place anymore. There's a Muslim family who has the keys to it. They have to be the ones to open it up and lock it every night because they can't trust any of the Christians to get along well enough to control the keys to it. So it's a terrible testimony. Not that Jews or Muslims don't have their own infightings about things too, but this one is one of those they can point to very quickly. There have been fistfights between priests within this place. Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff that happens that you would wonder how does this happen. This is the Edicule, that small building within the building. I think I have a better picture. Yeah, I have a different picture of it here. But you can see the dome up top. And again, that big gray dome has a clear spot on the top where light shines straight down into the tomb, into the Edicule. You can actually shines right on the stone that was rolled away for when Jesus rose. So it actually is done really well. It's a beautiful dome and entrance in there. Oftentimes, because the crowds are so large here, you won't get a chance to go into the attic. You might have to wait 5 or 6 hours to in line to try to get inside there. If you go at the right time of the day, you get lucky. You can kind of, I don't believe in luck, by the way, but you might get a chance to walk in and do that. I know some of you have been there. I've been there several times. It's really anticlimactic when you get in there, but it is the right spot. This is what the aedicule looks like again from the outside, and that's just been just undergone a lot of renovations. So I think this one was taken before the renovation started. So it's beautiful. It's strange, but there's so much else going on in the church. I think I'm going to stop with that. Oh, actually, this is the actual slab. So this is that marble slab I was talking about. The National Geographic pried up just a couple of years ago. Looked underneath, and they found that this is authentic in terms of time and place, and that the marble is on top of a limestone slab, which would have been authentic. That's what the cave was built out of. So I think there's really good reason to believe, 99.9% sure, that this is the actual place of the burial and the resurrection of Jesus. Again, real close to the place of crucifixion too. All right. Nearly out of words. I think I've spoken all the ones I could for this week. But I'd love to hear your questions. Anything? Go ahead. Yeah.
We went last year.
Okay.
We're in there.
Yeah.
And our tour guide said there might have been a discrepancy as far as the date. Like there was like 2 different time periods, 2 different tombs that were actually within the church. One was the 3rd century one, and one was the 4th century. So there was a discrepancy.
Okay, so usually the discrepancy is between the Church of the Holy Sepulchre being the authentic spot or the Garden Tomb. So evangelicals, again in the 1950s I think it was, they were looking for a place that was outside the walls, and when they came into the city they noticed that the church today is inside the wall of Jerusalem. The walls actually moved, so the church was outside, now it's inside the walls because the walls are in the wrong place now. And so when they came to Jerusalem, they said this can't be the right place because it's inside the walls of Jerusalem. So they went around looking in the area to see if they could find a place that looked like the right place, that was from the right period of time. And they came up with this garden tomb. The garden tomb is the wrong kind of tomb. It's actually it's a first temple tomb. And there's a different kind of burial that's used in that time than it is in the time of Christ. It would have been probably 500 BC, whereas this one's an actual 1st century tomb within here. And actually, the one that you can see inside the aedicule, there's also other ones within the church that are from the same period. There's a place, a little chapel inside called the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, which also is the right kind of tomb, which is in the same area, which also authenticates the fact that this is a 1st century tomb. And there were others in that area, in that vicinity too. So there's a lot going on with that. If you go to the Garden Tomb, it's a beautiful place to go. It's the wrong kind of tomb. They will give you a very interesting and convincing kind of argument that they have the right kind of tomb, but they're wrong on that. Sorry, but it's true. And it's not because they're trying to make money. It's an Anglican church actually that owns it, but it's not because they're trying to make money or anything. They're just trying to give you a different kind of experience, I think, to it too. So I don't know if I answered your question, but hopefully we're close to that. You guys, if you want a lot more on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you can go to Joel Kramer's. Just go to YouTube, go for Joel Kramer, Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and he gives a really good explanation of it. Go ahead, Brad.
Did you get a chance to see this? It's not like a 3-hour wait.
For this?
Yeah.
No, this is the one you have to wait for quite a while. It depends. I had a group go last year in March, and 3 days in a row they got up at 2 a.m. To go down there to be there when the church opens. I think it opens, it depends on what time of year, but I think it opens like 3:30 or 4. And each time they went, one of these churches had a scheduled service and they wouldn't let them in. But it's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes you go and there's no line. Like you go at the last part of the day, or if you go at a time like during just after COVID when we went, there's nobody there. I don't know. It's hard to know. But it can be a pretty rare thing. Unless you want to wait, and you're welcome to. You'll have some days where you have some free time, and if this is something that's high on your list, you could wait in line in there and get in there. So, other questions, you guys? Yeah.
What happened to the church when the regime changed?
So So mostly neglect. I mean, what you see today largely comes from the time of the Crusaders. So it's left from the 12th century. It's burned down a couple of times, either because of neglect or because of a lot of candles in the place as well, or a lot of different things. So it's been refurbished a bunch. The shell of the building. I mean, you can actually see graffiti from Crusaders from the 12th century in there. And actually, I think there's graffiti in there from the 1st or 2nd century too. There's a little small room that they don't let you go into. Again, if you watch the Joel Kramer video, we'll talk about it. But it's most likely 1st century graffiti that's in that church as well. So there's elements of that are still from that time. But it has been added on to over time, rebuilt, and sometimes parts of it have been reused in other parts. So you have Crusader parts that are part of the Middle Ages church that are reused in our time. So mostly for hundreds of years it was just neglect. But there were Christians who tried really hard to get there. Walking from Europe to come to Israel, even when the Muslims were in control, just to try to get into this church, and so they did. And for most of the time there wasn't any harassment, but there were times when they were harassed, and that's what brought about the Crusades was a desire to make it possible for pilgrims to go without being harassed to get into this church.
It's never turned into a mosque.
No, never turned into a mosque. There was a mosque right outside of it, the Mosque of Omar, I think, is right outside of it. And they built it intentionally higher to kind of assert some dominance over it or whatever, but no, they didn't turn it into a mosque. I think it was close to being turned into a mosque at one point, but the Mosque of Omar was built instead, just outside of it. So I think it's the Mosque of Omar. I don't get my mosques always right. Any other questions, you guys? Yeah, go ahead.
What's the 7th century building?
The 7th century?
On the diagram, there's a,
Let's see.
at the top up.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay.
Honestly, I've never been beyond this. Okay, so I talked about those other 1st century tombs. They're right here. They're often called the tombs of Joseph of Arimathea. And I think they were rediscovered not too long ago as Coptics were doing, or the Syrians were doing some renovations here, that there are other 1st century tombs within the church grounds of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre too. So that I know, but I don't know about this. Anybody know about this? Go ahead.
Well, that was what I was kind of going to ask is, are there other tombs around? Because it seems strange to me that someone rich of Joseph Vermont made this tomb right nearby this big animals or
Well, no,
not
so
close.
yeah, no, that's a good question.
Can you restate the question?
So the question is, why would Joseph of Arimathea have tombs nearby the place where crucifixions were done and maybe criminals were buried as well? So yeah, even though it's close by, it's still, it's a place that's accessible from the city, so it would have been a place that would have been.
I guess that's like, if there's other tombs there, like that,
Yeah.
that's just where people were.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, so most of the tombs were built in places where it had been a rock quarry before. And so this, outside the city walls, a lot of the rocks that were quarried probably for the temple would have been big slabs of limestone that have been used in building. And so the leftovers from that, it's already a beginning of a hole, right, that you can use as a tomb. And so when it was no longer available for a quarry, they would start to use it as tombs, kind of the second purpose of that place. And so because it was close to the walls, because it was accessible to bring things in, that was a natural place to build that. And again, there was a garden there, so it wasn't just a place of crucifixion, there was a garden nearby as well. And when you think about garden, you probably should think about like people's gardening plots where they would grow vegetables and things. So they would, like the Garden of Gethsemane was an olive press. It was a private olive press, so people would have had land there where they could grow their own olives and then make olive oil from that. So that's probably the same kind of garden we would have had out here too. And it is nearby, but it's really hard to imagine what it looked like because when Adrian came in, he intentionally hacked away a lot of what was there to kind of deface it. And probably the cave, even that was found by Eusebius, was largely destroyed. So it's really hard to imagine what it really looked like in the 1st century because all the things that have taken place there afterwards. I'm gonna let you guys go. If somebody wants to stick around and ask more questions, I'll stick around for a little while. But I think I made it through what I wanted to talk about, which I can't believe, 'cause I made it through.